Excited to have everyone here this evening. Many of you are showing up as BC, and I can see a couple of names as well. We're going to hold questions until the end of the formal presentation, about 40 minutes in, and then we'll unmute everybody, and you'll all be able to see each other as well if you want. Looking forward to this conversation this evening. What I'm going to be doing is spending about 40 minutes sharing some of the highlights from my book, Your Best Financial Life, talking about why it can be sometimes intimidating and challenging to save money. If you've been invited to this call, it's because your financial advisor shared an invitation with you. So I know you're already well on your journey. But again, I think there might be some things you can learn, some ideas you could share, some questions you might be able to ask that I think will have a really terrific conversation. So again, looking forward to this. And I believe it will be recorded and you would be able to access a replay of it in case you missed the very beginning. So with that, I think we'll jump in and get started. So again, about 40 minutes of conversation, of presentation, and then we'll open it up for any questions from the audience. So if you do have a question, you could drop it in the chat while we're going along. We'll go back and pick those up at the end, or we'll pull people off mute at the end and you can ask your question live as well. So with that, we are going to jump in. I wrote Your Best Financial Life. Actually, I started working on it over almost 8 years ago now, but it was published last year. It took a while. It went through several iterations. And the reason I wrote it is that partly because of my own experiences in my own 20s and 30s dealing with money, partly because I struggled with feelings of shame, feelings of incompetence, frankly, and how hard can this be? Why can't I figure it out? What's wrong with me? Why does everybody else know how to do this and I don't? As well as then subsequently spending almost 30 years working at JPMorgan Asset Management, where I was eventually head of retirement solutions. That meant I designed and ran JP Morgan's target date funds, which are called Smart Retirement, and basically spent the last 15 years of my career focused on helping individuals become better savers and helping them understand how to use behavioral economics to nudge themselves into a better place with their own savings, but also actually designing and managing over 150 billion, that's a B, billion dollars of other people's money. So I've seen this from all sides. And I am so happy to have you join me tonight and look forward to sharing an interesting conversation about money and your relationship with it. So I thought I would start off uh, by telling you a little bit about myself. And I was an extremely serious musician when I was in elementary school and middle school and high school. I played the piano. I practiced the piano for 2 hours a day. I practiced the viola for 1 hour a day. I was in the all-state orchestra as a kid. I was principal violist. When I got to college, I majored in politics and economics, but what I really did um, was play in the orchestra, play in a string quartet, and I was even in a medieval recorder ensemble one year. So when I got my first job out of college, something was missing. I worked for Senator John Glenn on the Governmental Affairs Committee, and it was a thrilling experience. Just saw so many amazing things and got to work on some really interesting pieces of legislation. But I knew something was missing from my life, and I ended up getting into the Arlington Symphony and playing that, but it wasn't enough. Now, at the same time, Capitol Hill staffers are not paid very much money, and it felt like my paycheck was gone before I ever saw it. Rent, utilities, the phone bill. Every month I'd hope I'd get a little bit ahead, and every month there was nothing. And my credit card bill got bigger and bigger and bigger. Then one day I got a letter from my boss in an envelope in the office, which was a little weird. But this letter said I'd been given an $800 bonus, and that was almost enough to pay off my credit card bill. And I went home that night just imagining how good it would feel to get that debt mostly paid down. And then I'd be able to tackle the rest of it because I wouldn't be making those interest payments. And I'd finally be able to get a little bit ahead. So after dinner, I settled down to flip through the newspaper to find the comics, and a classified ad leapt off the page at me. It said, used baby grand piano, $800. So I bought it. And I loved that piano even after I had it moved and tuned, which also cost me money, which went on the credit card bill, because suddenly I was a musician again. It made me happy whenever I saw the piano, but to be honest, I hadn't really practiced much after I got to college. In fact, I'd pretty much stopped practicing when I got to college. So having the piano made me feel happy in the moment, but the feeling in the pit of my stomach that I got whenever I thought about my credit card bill was constant. Now, I didn't realize it, but I was falling into the trap of something called future discounting. It means what is happening right now, today, is far more important than what might happen in the future. Whether that was dealing with my credit card bill, whether that was saving for an emergency fund, saving to have my car fixed, saving for a vacation. None of that saving, which was for something in the future, was as important as whatever I wanted to spend my money on in that moment. Future discounting is something you probably all wrestle with too. It's what happens when you log off at work, go home, check your email, do the dishes, settle down for the night to watch another episode of that series you started last weekend. And as that first episode that you're watching ends, you hit skip intro when the next one comes up. You don't even think about it. And then that episode ends, and that little skip intro button pops up, and you think, well, no, I've got time. It's only 10:30. I don't have to be up super early tomorrow morning. I've got a Zoom call, but I don't have to be on the camera. It's fine. It's fine. I'll watch another episode. So you settle back to watch one more episode, and before you know it, it's 1 a.m. And then you think, I can't believe I did that. But I've only got 2 episodes left. I can't stop now. And just like that, you have fallen victim to future discounting. Whatever is happening right now, which is watching that TV series, is far more important than getting up tomorrow morning for your 8 o'clock Zoom call. It's why we do things we later regret, like having a second or third piece of cake, or staying up till 1 a.m. to finish watching a Netflix series, or spending your bonus money on a piano instead of instead of paying down your credit card debt. We all fall victim to this, and it's especially difficult when it's money. But the thing you need to understand is that our brains are wired for this. We're not wired to delay immediate gratification. We're wired to take what is in front of us right now and run before the saber-toothed tiger eats us. I'm going to share some tips tonight that will help you understand your own relationship with money a little bit better, and some tips that will help, I hope, make financial decision making a little easier for you. And one of the keys to that is understanding both what your financial circumstances are right now and also understanding your own relationship with money and a little bit more about what kind of spender you might be. Now, this is from some statistics that I gathered in 2023. I don't think much has changed since then. In fact, it's probably a little worse now that people have to start repaying their student loans again. About half of all Gen Zers and millennials are losing sleep over their finances. So if you are feeling like this, you are by no means alone. And if you're not, I'm really, really grateful that you're not part of that bunch. But it is pretty typical for people to be very worried about their money. I think there's three big reasons for that. One of them is that housing is actually, seriously, you don't need me to tell you this, a lot more expensive than it was a couple of generations ago. In 1980, which is what we've sort of based this comparison on, you can see the orange line and the green line intersecting there. And that is looking at the median wage, real personal income, and the median house price in the US. And you can see that median wages have gone up a little bit. In fact, they've almost doubled, although it's a little hard to see on this chart because housing prices have gone up so much more, especially picking up after 2010. So median house prices have gone up almost 6 times, while median income has only almost doubled. So it is true, housing is way more expensive than it used to be. And that is just a very sad fact of life right now. I do personally believe that eventually that is going to settle into a better relationship, but eventually might be another 5, 10, 15 years before we finally see those prices adjusting a little more, hopefully because we get some more housing built in this country. The second reason younger people, especially, are feeling uncertain about their financial futures when we think about retirement, especially, is that most younger workers don't think they'll get anything from Social Security. This is showing what each generation thinks they'll get as a percentage of their income from Social Security. Now, those boomers who think they'll get about 38%, that's actually about what they'll get. Now, most of these boomers, or many of these boomers, are actually in retirement and have started getting Social Security already. So that's a little bit of a trick question for them. We're seeing a lot right now about Social Security and its solvency. Um, the good news, there is a little bit of good news here. The good news is that if nothing is done to fix Social Security, people today in your age, in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, will get, even 50s, will get about 75 to 80% of what they're supposed to get. So if on average you're supposed to get about 38% of your pre-retirement income, that means you will probably get 33 to 34% of that pre-retirement income. So it's by no means a good situation, but it is not nearly as bad as I think many Gen Zers and millennials believe. Social Security will be there. You will get something. It might be a little less than the current promises are, but there's also a lot of time for adjustments to work through the system. So that I think is something, unlike housing, where it really, really is really bad. I think Social Security is a little less dramatic. Now, the third reason that I think a lot of Gen Z and millennial people feel really stressed out about things is that, we are today bombarded with information online. We get it through podcasts, we get it through the searches that we choose to do, we get it through social media, and we cannot escape this barrage of financial information. A lot of information out there is great. I'd like to think the stuff I'm putting out is pretty solid. A lot of other people who are putting things out on the Fin Talks and the financial channels on Instagram and on the Reddit subreddits are very solid, but some of it's not great and some of it's pretty contradictory. So it's easy to feel overwhelmed by all of the advice out there. And last but not least, and I really think this is the giant elephant in the room, a lot of the fundamental reason people feel stressed out about saving for the future, and if they think about it at all, retirement, is that it centers around a series of questions that are impossible to answer. And we don't do a very good job of acknowledging. And when I say we, I mean the financial services industry, which I'm retired, but I still count myself as part of it. We're not often as frank as we could be about the fact that these are impossible to answer. Questions like, how much will I be able to save throughout the course of my life? Some of that answer is in your hands. Some of it may feel beyond your control right now because of your expenses and what's going on in your life. Another important question, how long will I work? Some of that's choice. Some of it might not be choice. So again, two big questions that will really drive how much you're able to save over your working career have kind of unknowable answers. Another big one, how much will my portfolio return? What will my investments generate in return? Again, history gives us some guideposts. I think it's probable that the stock market will continue generating 7 to 10% returns over the long run, but there's no guarantee. And there's going to be some bumps along the way. Some years will go up 20, some years will go down 20. So over time, I think we'll go up in a similar way that we have throughout the last, frankly, 100 years, but every time, not really. And then last but not least, how much will you need to spend when you retire? Another question that's impossible to answer, certainly when you're in your 20s and 30s, maybe even when you're in your 50s and 60s. It's pretty tough to know what your needs will be in the future. So all of these questions are hard to answer. And that means that the big question, how much should I be saving for retirement, is also a little bit unknowable. And I think that also drives a lot of underlying anxiety among people. Now, we in the financial services industry, your financial advisor can do a terrific job walking you through these questions, what choices you have, and the consequences that your actions will have on what that means for your own financial future. But at some level, you just have to accept a degree of uncertainty and a degree of comfort with uncertainty and know that because you've got an advisor and a plan, you'll be able to navigate through some of the bumps that you may experience in your life. One of the things I did when I was doing research for the book was do a survey of 1,000 people, asking them questions that related to how much they were currently saving, but also how they felt about money and whether or not they felt like they were doing things correctly or on track for their own financial future. And I got some really interesting answers. So out of that 1,000 people that I surveyed, all between the ages of 21 and 25, 21 and 45, they broke down into this. We researchers love these 2 by 2 matrices. So what I did was get answers about, do I think I'm on track? And that's the horizontal axis. So those two columns that you see. Yes, I think I'm on track. 17.4% yes, 26.4% no. Excuse me, do I think I'm on track? The yes column adds up to about 40% overall, 17.4% plus 26.4%. That's the yes column. No, way more than half, is about 60%. Now, when we look at the other dimension, am I on track? How well am I doing? We see smaller numbers doing well, right? I'm on track, 17.4 plus 12.4. It's about 30% are actually saving enough for retirement. That means 70% are. But what's really interesting is only 17.4% of the people are doing things right and know it. Everybody else is either confused, thinks they're doing it well but aren't, or vice versa, or is in trouble. So I then did focus groups to understand more about these groups of people. And what I learned was really interesting to me. That 17.4% who were confident in what they were doing with money had a money mentor as a child, typically. So somebody starting in their early teens and mid-teens and early 20s was helping them understand about saving, about spending in the financial markets. So again, if you've got a financial advisor, you're on a great track. The other group of people, the other 83% of the people that I talked to, all felt terrible about money. Even the ones that were doing things well still felt stress, fear, alienation, and shame. Again, that's one of the reasons I wanted to write this book. Nobody should feel ashamed about how they're doing with money because we can always make it better. And often the things that we view as things you're doing wrong or struggling with aren't so much to do with logical choices you're making rationally. They're to do with that reptilian part of your brain that wants to grab the thing and run before the saber-toothed tiger eats you. So we'll go through the spending types and learn a little more about what might be driving some of that behavior to help you build better guardrails around your own spending and maybe have a little more confidence in the way you save and invest money. So again, so many people feeling so much shame, so much lecturing. I think it's really unconstructive. And the best thing we can do is to forgive ourselves if we feel like we've made mistakes, because guess what? We all do. And they're all things that we can fix and make better and move forward from. So what life might look like to you may be what it looked like to me when I was in my 20s and 30s. You've got a huge chunk of money going out for housing, rent, or a mortgage. Many people have got a huge chunk of their daily monthly expenses going out in student loan repayments now. Rent, utilities, streaming services can take a huge bite out of your money. Food is probably a smaller portion of people's budget than it used to be. Clothing, again, has gotten a lot cheaper actually relative to total cost of living, and has dropped in terms of what we're earning. So that's maybe a smaller piece of the pie, but going out can really, really take a bite out of your budget. And once you've spent money on all of those things, there's often nothing left to save. So let's dig into those spending types to get a better handle about what might be going on. And I just want to make sure I keep an eye on the time here. Um, so 7 spending types. Number one, and this is very near and dear to my heart because so many of us do it, the oversubscriber. In 2022, the average individual had retail subscriptions of $219 a month. Do you know how many streaming services you have? Food delivery services you have? Movie options? I have a whole bunch of tech stuff. If I go into my phone, I try to do it at least every 6 months. There's always 2 or 3 things in there that I've actually forgotten that I've signed up for. Newspapers, Substack. My gosh, I'm subscribing to all kinds of things on Substack and that think, yeah, that looks like a good idea. $9.99 a month, boom. It really adds up. 2 out of 3 people have forgotten at least one subscription they've signed up for. So again, if you've got an iPhone, you can go in there and check anything that's in an app. I highly recommend that you go into your credit card bills. Again, not all the time because that's a way to make yourself feel like you're beating yourself up, but at least once every 6 months or once a year, go through and look for any recurring charges because I bet you there's at least one in there that you forgot you signed up for. So that's a really good piece of personal hygiene. Another couple of tips, avoid auto renew if you can. Some sites, it's really hard to do, but if you've got the choice, don't auto renew. You'll get pinged and asked if you want to sign up for it or have it keep going. And that is the best way to ask yourself, am I really using this? The second thing, it's a little bit sneaky. If you happen to have more than one credit or debit card, and please do not sign up for a second one just for this purpose. But if you do happen to have more than one card, always sign up for a subscription service with the card that is going to expire the soonest. Why? Because it's going to expire and you'll be asked to input new credit card information. And that is a beautiful way to put some brakes on some of the spending. I talked earlier about how much information we're being bombarded by today that just frankly wasn't true when I was in my 20s and 30s. And something else that's really challenging, I think, is it's become much easier to spend our money, right? When I was in my teens, I had to get into a car or take the bus to go to a store, and then I had to have cash or write a check to spend money. And now I literally can see something cute and I can swipe my phone or tap my phone or hit buy while I'm scrolling through social media as I'm standing in the elevator. Those are not great ways to stop spending. So again, the more we can do to find ways to slow ourselves down, and again, having your credit card expire is a great way to put your brakes on your spending. Second kind of spender, the accidental spender. I call this consumption creep. When you are first starting out, you are maybe living in a shared apartment. You are probably eating a lot of ramen. You might not have a car. You might be driving a beater car. You are saving as much money as you possibly can. And then as your income starts increasing, you start increasing your lifestyle. And of course you should, right? That's a rite of passage as our incomes increase. We should be enjoying the benefit of those raises. However, we need to keep a handle on that consumption creep because if we get raises and we spend 100% of that raise and never increase the amount we're savings, we're never going to be able to get in front of certainly a long-term goal like retirement, but even shorter-term goals like being able to afford a new car and not have to put the whole thing on credit or a house down payment. So one of the best things you can do as soon as you possibly can is make a promise to yourself that you will save half of every raise. So if you get a 5% raise, or if you're lucky, a 10% raise, pocket half of it. Use that to fuel more lifestyle because that's great. You should be able to do that as you get older. That other half should be going into savings. And if you do that over time, you will relatively painlessly find yourself saving significant amounts of money, being able to afford larger purchases like a new car, like a down payment for a house, and still be saving for retirement. That's how you make room in your life for all of that savings. And it's very sneaky consumption creep. It's how people find themselves going bankrupt when they're in their 40s and 50s because suddenly they cannot juggle all those bills. So again, it's something to really keep an eye on as you're starting out. Now, a couple of other spending types that maybe are a little less obvious. This kryptonite comes in and out of fashion depending on how the markets are doing. It's something we saw a lot of when the whole GameStop thing happened with the meme stocks. There are certain types of people that are just attracted to this notion of striking it rich, getting in on the next big thing, scoring big. Some people are comfortable with and like to take risk, and that is great. I'm not going to tell you not to do it. I am telling you, however, that it is really, really easy to lose a lot of money that way. So if you do feel like you've got a line on a sure thing, you've done a lot of homework, you understand a stock or a cryptocurrency, and you really want to get invested, I strongly urge people to think very carefully about how much money they can afford to lose, rather than thinking about how much money they might be able to make. So just like I hope you give yourself a budget if you go to Las Vegas or gambling anywhere, and give yourself an entertainment budget of $100 or $50, maybe a little more, think about these sort of very high risk, high reward, potentially investments like a crypto or a meme stock, uh, like gambling, and think I might lose all of this money. If I do lose all of this money, how will I feel? And only invest what you can risk. I think your retirement money should never be in any of these assets. But if you want to take 5% of your sort of investment portfolio, a little bit of your savings, and use it to learn about a company, use it to learn about a cryptocurrency, I think that's fine. Just make sure you keep that investment contained so that if it all goes wrong, and again, 3/4 of Bitcoin investors lost money between 2015 and 2022. That's a lot of people. If you do happen to be one of those people, you keep the losses contained so it doesn't derail your whole financial life. Now, something else, it's kind of the opposite of that kryptonite, the survivor. There have been a lot of really crazy market moves in 2008 and 2020, and just earlier this year. Fair bit of economic uncertainty out there right now, and it may really be leaving a big mark on investors. In fact, the average worker between the ages of 27 and 42, I'm sure that applies to none of you if you've got a financial advisor, but most people are scared to invest. They've seen their parents lose money, their grandparents lose money. You may have lost money in the market, and it's scary. Markets do not go up all of the time. Sometimes they go down a lot too. And especially if you're not diversified, if you put all of your money into a single stock or a cryptocurrency and it goes down 50, 75%, it can basically scare you out of the water and you don't want to invest again. So again, if you fall into that camp, a couple of things to remember. The market does not go up all the time, but it goes up over time. And if you miss the 10 biggest days in investing, you typically wipe out almost all of your investment returns. And those big return days almost always come after very big sell-off days. So staying consistent, staying invested is one of the most important things. But another thing to think about is think about how you define risk. Risk is what you have to spend to get return. The riskier something is, the more return you theoretically should be able to get, and the less risky, the less return. Even in a high yield savings account, which is now running maybe 1 to 2% above inflation, you're not going to really see your assets grow significantly. So you need a little more risk than that. If you leave it in a bank savings account, you're losing money after one of the most insidious risks, one of the most difficult to see risks, inflation. Now, when I wrote the book, inflation was still very, very low. Since I've written the book, since it was published, in fact, inflation spiked up significantly. So inflation is now something we're all a lot more aware of. But believe it or not, for your long-term savings, inflation really is the number one risk, not market risk, because the markets, again, over time will go up. Inflation is the silent thing that will eat away at your purchasing power of that money. So again, you really need to keep an eye on having enough risk. I call it being right risked for your investment goals. The longer your investment goal is, and again, retirement is a really long one, the more risk you should have in your portfolio. The shorter that investment horizon for emergency funds, maybe if you're trying to make a big purchase in a year or two, like a car or a house, that should all be in cash where you don't really risk losing any money. But longer term, you should have a lot of risk. Another type of spending type here is the ostrich. And I think I fell into this camp a little bit. I still maybe do, which is I just don't even want to think about it. I'm not scared about it. I certainly am not scared of it, but I just for someone who does this for a living, it's not super important to me. And so I just kind of figure it'll all work out. And often it does. So, I will confess, I probably am not quite on top of some of these things that I'm sharing as I could be. And I've also learned to accept that about myself. And again, put in some guardrails around myself to make sure I don't get into trouble. One of which is I have a financial advisor. But also automating as much as I can so that I don't have to do things because when I rely on myself to take action, I often forget. So I know myself well enough to know that I can't put myself in that position. So if you're an ostrich, either because it makes you super stressed out and you don't want to look because it's scary, or just because you don't care, there are a couple things you can do about that. One is to actually acknowledge this. Yeah, you can say to yourself, look, I don't like paying attention to this. And then think about scheduling a check-in. It can be on your birthday. It could be on another date that's meaningful to you. Maybe it's the date you got your first job. Maybe it's the date something really good happened to you and say, yeah, I'm gonna schedule a check-in and I'm gonna make sure I just look through everything. Does it all still make sense to me? Um, a lot of times we place these check-ins or budget exercises around year end, and I think that's a terrible time to do it because many of us are already thinking about New Year's resolutions and looking back at last year and thinking, oh, if only I should have. Next year I'll be better. It's a bad time to load yourself up with other obligations, I think. So if money is a thing that stresses you out, and again, who among us doesn't? Feel stressed about it sometimes, try to avoid times of year that can be big triggers for that just because it's not going to help you make better decisions. Number six, we're almost done here. Number six, the Firefly. Maybe some of you have heard about the FIRE movement, which stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. I think that is a terrific, terrific goal. At its most extreme, folks who are trying to do FIRE are saving 50 or 60 or even 70% of their income, trying to live as cheaply as possible. $40,000 a year was the number that was thrown around by the first fire folks that were talking about it in the early aughts and 2010s. Um, and the notion is that you save up enough money, typically $1 million, that you could follow a 4% withdrawal rule and live on $40,000 a year forever and basically not have to have a sort of a day job anymore. And again, 100% supportive of, I am 100% supportive of saving aggressively to give yourself more flexibility as you get older. And the more you save, the more choices you will have later in life. However, I will say that 50 to 60% savings rate that the sort of die-hard fire advocates recommend is really hard. And I think there are an awful lot of people who have aggressively tried to do it and then have this terrible boomerang out of it. And it actually can be very discouraging for people after a while. So again, I think the most important thing to do is to be striving for balance, to be thinking very carefully again about consumption creep. Again, I think that fire movement is terrific at helping you sort of avoid consumption creep. But again, I think, a lot of people don't want to live like they did in college once they have a well-paying job. Um, that's asking a lot. So again, I think a tempered fire approach can be very, very great. Again, if you can save 15 to 20% of your income, you're going to have plenty of choices when in your 50s or 60s. You may even be able to retire a little earlier if you save on the 20% plus side and you stay frugal with your life choices. But I do think 50 to 60 is a tough one. But if you want to do that and you are doing it, then I say terrific. That's great. If you struggle with that, then I don't think that's necessarily a bar you need to set for yourself. Last but not least, and this is one I totally identify with, the splurger. Save up for a while and then totally blow it. It can be emotionally exhausting and make you feel really, really, really out of control with your money. One thing that I personally resonate with a lot is sort of the fancy things make me happier. So and again, I've just accepted this about myself. I am just wired this way. One of my kids is wired this way too. The other one isn't. It's quite funny watching them. But the nicer something is, the more joy I get from spending my money on it. So, um, some people, it's buying something is enough. It doesn't have to be fancy. For me, if the nicer it is, the happier I am. So I tend to skew uncomfortably towards higher priced items. And I know I've got to be really careful with how I treat my spending because of that. So automating can be a real friend to splurgers. Lock in those savings. Something else I do that really has helped me regain control of my finances, I have a lot of rules about when and how I allow myself to spend money. For instance, I don't allow myself to buy anything off of Instagram. Um, I make myself write it down. I make myself put it in a shopping cart and I make myself wait. So I do not get to go click buy right now. When I'm dealing with physical stores, and this is especially true for clothing, I don't let myself buy clothing online. I only buy it in person because I'm terrible about returning things. So I have ended up buying a lot of things online that don't fit or I don't like, and I don't return them. So I know I'm bad at it. I don't do it. Um, learn yourself what you do well, what you don't do well, and then without judgment say, I'm like this. I'm terrible at returning things. I don't buy things online. Something else that I'm terrible at is trying a piece of clothing on. If it looks good on me, I'll buy it. Whether or not it was something I need, whether or not it's something I have room in my budget for. So I've also learned not to let myself try anything on unless I need it. So those are two of the ways I manage my own splurger tendencies. But again, understanding your own um, wiring around these types. And again, nobody is all one thing or another. Many people are a little bit of many of these things. There may be more out there that you find explain yourself. But these are great ways of becoming a little more familiar with your own spending um, and your own emotions around money. So I really invite you to try to do that. Now I'm checking the time. I see we're at about 7:40. Um, One thing I want to talk briefly about is the importance of compound returns. And in my book, I use a fun example. Compound returns sounds like this terrible math problem where you have somebody who's been given $200 and asked to calculate what the effect of a 4% interest rate compounded monthly would be after 2 years. And you sort of look at the formula and you just think this is really complicated. So we're going to do this with something a little more fun, which is bagels. So let's just say the Bagel Fairy says that they're going to increase, you eat 100 bagels a month, and the Bagel Fairy is going to increase your bagel allotment by 10 bagels a month. So month one, you get 110 bagels from the Bagel Fairy. Month two, you get 120, and month three, you get 130, and month seven, you've ended up with 170 bagels, which sounds amazing, right? That's actually not right. That's not how compound return works. What happens is it's what you had before times 10%. Again, the Bagel Fairy has given us a 10% increase in our bagel allotment every month. So month one, you get 110. But month two, you get 10% of 110. So now that's 121. Month three, 10% of 121 is 133. And by the time you get to month seven, you've almost doubled your bagels, 195 bagels. That's 25 more bagels you'd have than if you had no compounding. So compound interest is truly one of the most magical things you can do. And one of the reasons why so many financial professionals really try to get people to start saving early into tax advantaged accounts and otherwise is to start getting that compounding effect working, because the longer your money has to grow, the more time you have to let that magic of compound returns really work for you. The more you save in your 20s and 30s, the less you will have to save in your 50s and 60s. It's dramatic. It's dramatic. So again, one of the most powerful things you can do is start saving. So right before we open it up for questions and answers, I'd like to just give you 5 things you can think about as you think about how you're saving, how you should be saving. Again, your financial advisor may well have gone over this with you. And to share a couple of ways to think about some of the trade-offs and choices that you might be thinking about as you put your own savings plan together. Number one, the single most important thing you can do is save for a rainy day. In my book, I call it the oh shit fund, which is what you say when something terrible happens, like you need to replace all 4 tires at once, your transmission fails. We had to put a new roof on our house about 4 months after we bought it, and we had spent every dime we had on this house. I ended up having to take a loan from my 401k plan, which is an incredibly embarrassing thing to say for someone who does 401ks. We just didn't have the money. That's what your emergency fund is for. It is for situations, and I tell this story in the book about a woman who had the worst week ever. She was in her best friend's wedding and tore her bridesmaid's dress and had to have it repaired. On the way to the airport, she dropped her phone down a sewer and had to buy a new phone. She had to change her flight. She had to pay for the new ticket because she missed her flight. And then she lost her passport because she lost her purse at the after party of the wedding and had to go get a new passport and had to change her flight again and had to pay more money. The total bill for her week was something like $2,453. That is a bad, bad week. That is what your emergency fund is for. Second thing you should be doing as you get that emergency fund going, you should be putting money into a tax advantage savings account. That's a 401k or an IRA. There's some other alphabet soup numbers out there like 403b, but these are tax advantage savings, which means that the money you put in grows with no taxes. And again, depending on whether it's regular or Roth, and we can talk about that, it's either taxed before you put it in or when you take it out. So this money will grow without paying taxes, and that will make a huge difference again in how much money you have in retirement, as much as 10 or 20% more, depending on how your taxes play out. So again, hugely important to get those 2 things going. Even if you haven't finished building up your emergency savings fund first, if you have a 401k at work and if they match your savings, you should start doing that right away, because the match is free money. Many employers match half of what you put in up to a certain amount, and all of that is free. That's basically doubling. The match doubles any money you put in. So you want to get the match as fast as possible and then let time grow that money with compound returns. My advice is once you have got that rainy day fund up, which is 3 to 6 months living expenses, and you've gotten the match on your 401k, then you assess your budget and balance retirement and debt. So first step, save. Second, tax advantage savings. Third, assess your budget. Pay down debt. High interest rate debt is what you should focus on first. Credit cards, non-federal student loans, anything over 8%, which is a slightly random number, but somewhere between 7 and 8%, you should be aggressively paying those down. Anything at an interest rate below 8%, which might be a mortgage, maybe if you're lucky, an old car loan, or a guaranteed student loan, make the minimum payments on that because you want to get rid of that high interest rate debt first. Once you do that, then you should stay the course and make the most of your retirement savings. And that's when you should be trying to push those retirement savings up to at least 10 to 15% of your total gross paycheck before taxes. So that's a goal. It's really hard to get there, but once you get there, then you can start having fun. Now, I talked more about saving half of every raise, and I know I want to leave some time for questions here, so I'm going to move through this a little quickly. But once you've got your stash going and you think, well, how do I get there? I said 10 to 15 for retirement. If you throw in saving for other goals like a house down payment or vacations, now you're talking maybe 15 to 20% of your total income should be going into savings. And if you've just started out or you're saving 3 or 5%, you're just thinking that's totally impossible. And I get that. You cannot do that today. if you are saving 5% today, you cannot turn around and bump that savings rate up to 20% because where is that 15% going to come from? Like, don't set yourself up for failure. Instead, make yourself a promise today, tonight, that tomorrow, the next time you get a raise, the next time you get a bonus, the next time you get a windfall of some sort, a tax refund, a birthday present, an inheritance, you save at least half of it. Now let's just walk through the math here. If you are starting out at a $50,000 salary and saving 1% of that, that means you're saving $500 a year. You get a raise, 5% raise. Now you save 3.5% because you saved half of that 5% raise, 2.5. So now you're at 3.5%. You're now saving $1,800 a year. Then you're at 6%, $3,000 a year. Then you're at 8.5%, almost $5,000 a year. A couple years later, you're at 13.5%, 16%, and now you're saving 21% of $73,000. You're saving $15,000 a year. And you still got to enjoy, a huge chunk of that money as lifestyle. So this is the way that you bump up that savings rate. It's very, very difficult to do today. Today, you, the one that's binge watching Netflix, is not going to want to cut spending dramatically. Tomorrow, you can give away a little bit of a windfall or a future increase that they don't actually have. It's not painful. So this save more tomorrow is really the trick to doing that well. And that's how you start building your best financial life. I want to close with a quick story that may help you think about the reframing of this. And this is something, again, that happened in that first house that needed a new roof right after we bought it. It had a backyard, a basement, on a slab, right? The ground floor was the basement. There was no basement underneath it. We were on a slab floor, stuck right on the dirt. And then there was a door out to the backyard. And there was this nasty little toilet stuck under the staircase. And we wanted to move the toilet to the other side of the room to put it together with some other kitchen cabinets and make a little kitchen out of it. We were turning that into an apartment, actually, and wanted to get a renter in there. So we wanted to move this toilet to the other side, but we had to run the plumbing for the toilet across the door. So we talked to the architect and he said, well, yeah, you could jackhammer out the basement and that's, tens of thousands of dollars, $20,000. I don't even know how much money. So we were like, oh, that's all right. So we call a contractor and say, how about this jackhammer out and then we can lower the floor. We'll have more headroom. And he's like, you don't want to do that. It'll be super expensive. But there's this really cool pump that they're selling that will take that sewer pipe from the toilet and pump it over the door. Okay, that sounded like a terrible idea. But we call the plumber and we say, okay, Mike, his name was Mike. Mike, what do you think about this pump? And he says, okay, so you want to move the bathroom over there, which is a great idea. That'd be excellent. You got this door here. And okay, so you're going to have people park in your driveway and walk all the way around the house and walk through the backyard to step over this sewer pipe. That's what you want to do. And we're like, that's what we want to do. And he just said, move the door. Move the door to the other wall. Super cheap, super easy, a much better layout for the apartment. $800 later, we were on our way. So what I want to leave you with is an invitation to think about ways that you can reframe whatever financial problem you feel stuck by. How can you maybe remove some of the walls that you've created around yourself and ask, how can I move a door? How can I create more room for myself with my money? How can I understand my own emotional relationship with my money so that I can forgive myself if I've been beating myself up? Because probably the reason you're doing what you're doing with money is because you were taught that, or it was what you took away from your family situation growing up, or maybe you're just wired like that. It's not an excuse necessarily to be irresponsible with your money, but it's an explanation for why you might be making the choices you are. And once you understand that and your emotional relationship with your money, it's much easier to create rules for yourself like I did all those hacks I shared about the spending types, automation is your best friend when it comes to money. Those are the best ways that you can to start living your best financial life. So I'd love to take some questions. I'm going to stop sharing now. And Barbara, can you maybe let people jump into the room and we'll just see if you've got questions and you'd like to drop them into the chat. We'd be happy to answer them there. Otherwise, Barbara, if you could take people off mute and open the video. And yeah, I guess everybody can do it themselves if they'd like to. We'll see if we get a few questions. And if not, I know, Barbara, you've gotten some online that we can also ask people.
Yes, we do have a question in the chat from Monique Lander. How do you balance living fully today while still preparing wisely for retirement?
You know, I love that question because it's that battle that we all have between our current self and our future self. And something I talk about in a lot more detail in the book is the fact that when we are asked to imagine ourselves, a certain part of our brain lights up. When we are asked to imagine ourselves next year or in 2 years, the same parts of our brain light up. When we're asked to imagine ourselves more than 10 years in the future, the part of our brain that lights up is totally different. And it's the part of our brain that lights up when we think about strangers. So when we save money for that future self is a stranger. So it's really painful. Um, a couple of things. One, familiarizing yourself with the power of compound returns. And Barbara, maybe we can add a graph to the pack that we'll send out. And there's a chart in the book actually that shows how that compound return really starts growing. And if you haven't yet, you'll all be receiving a copy of the book. But the power of that money 10, 20, 30 years down the road, it's free money, right? It is the gift that keeps giving. It was called the eighth wonder of the world by Einstein, I think. And that's one way to help yourself pay a little bit to that for future person. Another great way to help yourself save for those future goals is to make it very tangible. And again, I'm living now in a different house than the one that needed a roof. This one, after we fixed that one up, we then turned around and bought an 1906 Queen Anne Victorian that needed everything. It needed new wiring, it needed new plumbing, it needed a new roof. We spent about 13 years renovating this thing and we love it, but it also needed new windows. 53 windows in this house all needed replacing. And for the longest time, I turned every financial decision I had to make into windows. A window was about $1,000. So it was basically everything I thought about was how many windows is that? I have this goal, which is to replace all the windows in this house. Back when flat screen TVs were just coming becoming affordable, they were still like $4,000 or $5,000 to get a big flat screen TV. But I remember thinking, that's 5 windows. We don't need a big TV. We can watch the Super Bowl. We had a big Super Bowl party. We can do it on our old vacuum tube TV because it's 5 windows. So making, if you're saving for a specific goal, making that very tangible is really helpful. You can do that with vacations, airplane tickets, right? Turn what might be a thoughtless expense into every time you think about spending money. It's, well, how much of wait, that's 2 plane tickets. I'm not spending that money. If you're trying to save for retirement, one way, there are all these apps that will age your own face. Kind of scary, but it's good. That has shown clinically to actually make you feel like that future you is less of a stranger. Something else that might happen is that might help is to just be a little more observant of the people around you. But again, number one, I think back to Save More Tomorrow is maybe you are living your life fully right now, and it would be really hard to cut back. But man, you can cut back in the future. So enjoy your life today. Stop beating yourself up. And that next raise, maybe save 60, 70, 80% of it because you can live your life the way you are right now, get a raise, still live your life the way you're living it, and stick a little more into savings. Hope that helps.
Great. We have another question from Nick Lynch. What is a good target for the amount of money to have in the rainy day fund?
Most people say 3 to 6 months salary, and that really comes from, imagining the kinds of things that could happen to you, right? You could get laid off. I have two kids. Actually, my older son just got laid off because he worked for something that was very closely attached to the federal government. He's interviewing now. Hopefully, he'll get a new job. It's been 2 months now. He's doing a whole bunch of interviewing. Hopefully, it'll be 3 months. Rainy day fund, very important. Something else to think about, my younger son, for example, is a musician and he doesn't have a steady job. So the less steady your income is, the more variable your income is, the bigger your emergency savings fund should be, frankly. My younger son should and is building up a much larger emergency savings fund than my older son, just because his life is a lot more uncertain. Something else might be your industry. If you're in an industry, and we would have said government fell into this bucket a few months ago, but if you're in an industry that has typically had very stable employment, you might feel comfortable with a slightly lower emergency savings rate. Um, if you have a medical condition, if you have pets and don't have pet insurance, those are all things that might drive you towards a larger emergency savings fund. But I think 3 months at a minimum is about right. If you have a car, think about the size of your typical car repairs. There's typically 500, 1,000, $2,000. Like those are numbers that you can probably get your arms around when you think about the things that have gone wrong, big or small in your life. And you should think about being able to handle a couple of those, let's call them mini disasters at a time. So again, 3 to 6 months is conventional. I'd say lean longer, bigger. The more uncertainty you have in your life, the more secure your life is, the more of a backstop you have, the more you may have family resources to draw on, right? Those are all other things that maybe can substitute a little for an emergency fund if you need one. So that's the way to think about it. I didn't talk about insurance either. I talk about it a lot in the book. To me, one of the biggest risks that people underestimate is the risk of being underinsured for car replacements. If you just have liability insurance and don't have replacement insurance and you need your car to get to work, that could be very expensive. Renter's insurance. If you are renting, some landlords make you buy it, but rental insurance is actually really cheap and it will insure your stuff. If somebody breaks into your apartment, if there's water damage, if you lose a suitcase, renter's insurance will often cover you for some of that loss. And those are the kinds of things that can, push you not having enough health insurance, right? Things that can push you into bankruptcy are these insurable risks. And it feels bad because you're basically spending money on something you hope you never need. But I like to think about it as making sure the worst thing doesn't happen. And so again, I think insurance is something most people underestimate.
Great. We have two more questions on that same line. What percentage of your current income do you recommend putting into your 401k?
I think it's a little tricky to answer that question because there are maximums, and I'm embarrassed to say I can't remember the absolute maximum now. It changes every year and it changes on your age. It's $16,000 or $18,000 a year. So if you're earning, let's say, I'm going to throw out a crazy number, $250,000 a year, you can't save enough in your 401k because you'd max out before you got to 10%. Most people would say that between what you put in and your employer's match, you need to save at least 12 to 15% in retirement. So you can do the math. If you're earning $100,000 a year, you should be saving between, call it 10 to 15% yourself. Your employer is matching some of that, and that'll get you up to that 12 to 15% range. If you start being tapped out, you need to start saving elsewhere. You may or may not be able to put that into an IRA because there are income limits to some of these things. And these are good problems to have. But then that's when you start putting things into a taxable account. But again, I typically think about it in percentage terms. And the reason why, there's a reason here. You want to think about income and retirement in replacing your current lifestyle. Most people think that after you retire, you will probably spend 70 to 80% of what you are spending now for a couple of reasons. One, you're not saving anymore. So you stop saving, maybe that's 15 or 20% right there. You need less money. And secondly, your expenses will probably drop after maybe a little bit of like fun travel. So you're not commuting, you're not buying work clothes, you're not eating lunch out, right? There are all kinds of expenses. And maybe if you're telecommuting, some of those expenses are already not in your life. But for many people, right, you lose some of those additional expenses. So you typically spend a little less. And so that's where this, if you save 10 to 15% for retirement, that for almost everybody is going to generate sort of that income replacement of 70 to 80% when you put in Social Security together with what you've saved. So that's why people tend to do it in percentage terms. But $100,000, you should be aiming to save at least $10,000 to $15,000 a year in retirement. Hope that helps.
Great tip and reminder to get the free money. We
Get
have
the
one
free
more
money.
question.
Get the free money. Yes.
Yes. One last question. What's the one thing about money or retirement you wish you had learned 10 years earlier?
Time, 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 time. Time is so powerful. Compound returns and time are so powerful. If you earn 7% a year, your money will double every 10 years. If you earn 10%, I'm averaging this out, right? I'm being rough, but if you earn 10% a year, your money will double every 7 years. So in my book, I can pull up the page number when you get it. If in my book, there's a really great chart that shows that power of compound returns and starting earlier versus later. And it makes an incredibly big difference in how much you have to save overall. Somebody who starts in their 20s basically has to save half as much as somebody who starts in their 30s or 40s in terms of the dollars that you're putting in. So starting early is important. And the second thing I really wished I'd figured out a little earlier is this save half of every raise, because we let lifestyle creep run longer than we should have. And you have to claw it back. And it's much easier not to spend it in the first place than it is to try to stop spending it after you've gotten used to spending it, let me tell you. So not getting used to a higher lifestyle is probably the other really important thing I wished I'd figured out a little earlier. So if there are no, I just want to give one more second. Anybody else have a question or comment they'd like to share?
Well, I think that's a wrap.
Okay, well, I just want to thank everybody so much for joining. Hopefully you learned something. And if you joined late or are watching this on a replay because we've made it available to you, I hope you found it useful. And just want to say thank you. And I hope you enjoy the book. And whether you do or don't enjoy the book, I would really appreciate an honest review on Amazon or Goodreads. Thanks.